Shannon, thank you so much for joining me on The Same Drugs today. I just finished reading your book recently. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this too.
So, as you know, you've written a book.
I do
um,
recall.
my copy is covered in sand and is damaged by pool and ocean water.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I it was really well written. I hope that doesn't sound condescending because I know I told you a bunch in DMs that I was really impressed at how it's interesting because of the subject matter, but it's also a really enjoyable read, which you know I'm sure many people don't realize that writing is quite a difficult skill. So it's rare when people are actually good at it.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
So, can you tell me a little bit about you? Tell our audience a little bit about you before we get into the meat of the book and the topic at hand. Who are you? Where did you come from?
So, I originally came from bluegrass country. I was raised by drunk rednecks. Um, I was not really prepared for college. And then I moved to the city. Um, and I kind of, in the internet age, I kind of became an atheist by sort of having conversations online and stuff like that. And I dated some women, went to some drag shows, participated in drag bars, drag shows, experimented with polyamory. So I really ran pretty far away from my Christian roots in my early 20s. Um, and I did go to college for graphic art. I did that for a while. I eventually went to school for IT later in life, and I started kind of pulling myself together and kind of becoming a responsible adult. So that's kind of where I was at when I first met Jamie.
How old were the both of you when you met? Jamie is your now ex-partner, who we'll discuss further.
Right. We were in our early 30s.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And was this the first relationship you'd ever had with a man?
Um, no, but it was probably the first serious relationship I'd had with a man.
I guess when you met him, were you identifying as bisexual? I'm just
Yeah, I actually identified as a lesbian before I met Jamie. Obviously, meeting Jamie and falling in love with him was a little confusing. Um, so, you know, I considered myself bisexual eventually once we had kind of gotten together. But yeah.
yeah. And when you two met, it sounds to me like you both were extremely liberal, and that you might have been described today as even woke.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did tell me a bit more about your politics. I don't know if you still consider yourself a liberal. But
I do. Yeah. Yeah, I think we were just kind of standard liberals. I mean, you know, I hold all the standard liberal views that I still do to this day. I was a feminist. I wasn't familiar with the transgender scene until Jamie came out, but um, I was a liberal and a feminist.
mhm. And do you think that you were attracted to him initially because he wasn't super masculine, or was it not really about that?
Well, he wasn't feminine. I will say that he's actually he was a pretty masculine guy, although not really in a alpha male kind of way. He's kind of a musician, kind of a Kurt Cobain type. So 5 o'clock shadow, grungy clothes, um, but very very male. I mean, he didn't read female to me or feminine at the time.
And at that time, what year would that have been? I guess like the mid
when we met.
90s. Yeah. Or the mid 2000s, I mean.
Gosh, yeah, I think it was early 2000s.
Yeah. And so
Mhm.
was transgender a thing then? Had you encountered transgender people or trans activism?
I don't think I had encountered a transgender person before I met Jamie. Well, I'll say this. So back in my gay bar days, I did know two people who called themselves transsexuals. So they were, gay men who had transitioned, they had had surgeries. They didn't call themselves trans women or transgender. That wasn't really a word then, at least not in that scene. And they were uh, quick to admit that they were men. So I did know those two people, but I wasn't familiar with any of the sort of modern transgender people at the time when I met Jamie.
Tell me a bit about your relationship prior to the point where he started becoming interested in transitioning and trans politics. I
Yeah,
mean, anyone who reads the book will become quite familiar with your relationship, but I mean,
right,
what was what was your relationship like? How was your sex life? How was your communication? How was
right.
your trust level between the two of you?
Yeah, our relationship was really, really great when we first got together, and actually for the entire 14 years or so before the transgender reveal. So we had a lot in common. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I fell for Jamie. Despite kind of not having a lot of experience with men, we both loved outdoorsy stuff, backpacking, music. Um, like I said, we had similar politics. We loved to go out to concerts. We were pretty active and, we had fun. We did lots of fun things together. Our sex life was amazing. It was really great. We had wonderful communication, a really deep level of honesty and intimacy all the way for the first 14 years or so.
It's crazy because it really does seem like there was such a drastic change
Yeah.
when Jamie got interested in transgenderism. How old was he at that point, or how old were both of you? I suppose.
When he first, well, so he cross dressed before he identified as transgender. And he did that for some months before he called himself transgender, and he was 39 at that point.
Hmm. I mean, I talked to Genevieve Gluck recently. I interviewed her for this podcast, and she talked about some similar things that you revealed in your book in sort of a different way. I mean, the book's called 18 Months. Um, Tell me, that's based on a joke that you, I think, read online, right?
Well, it's actually it refers to the 18 months between the moment when he began cross dressing and the moment of our divorce.
Oh, okay. What I'm thinking of, that's correct. What I'm thinking of is there was a joke about I think it's the difference or the time difference between a cross-dresser and
Right,
a
right,
trans
right.
woman. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
So early on, in Jamie's cross dressing, he found a joke on a cross dresser's bulletin board, and the joke was, "What's the difference between a cross dresser and a trans woman?" And the answer is 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Yep, yep, that's right.
So that's sort of like not just an under discussed thing, but I would say something that's quite hidden by the trans activist community, that
Yeah.
connection between
Hmm.
cross dressing and transgenderism. Um, when Jamie started getting interested in cross dressing, what did he tell you about that?
So the first time Jamie cross dressed, it's because we were looking at porn together. So he kind of led us in the direction of looking at what he called tranny porn.
Mhm.
Um, and he had a sexual interest in that. and we explored that. We had sex. I gave him a makeover, and then he kind of for the next few days continued to wear the blouse I had put on him and things like that. So I kind of knew that he was interested in that. And then a few days later, he made kind of an announcement to me that he was going to start cross-dressing, and I was kind of like, yeah, I know, because he had already sort of been doing it. But at first he was very, very adamant that, like, yeah, this is just fun for me. It's a sexual interest. It's a personal expression. He used to say very often, I wear women's clothes as a means of self-expression, as a punk might wear a mohawk. He started a blog, and he spent a lot of time defending cross-dressing as its own thing, a valid identity, a valid thing to do, not a sign that you're transgender, and just something he was doing for fun.
And at what point did he start to see it or discuss it as something other than just a sort of fun form of expression?
Yeah.
Playing around with, I don't know, gender norms, gender stereotypes, something
Right.
like that.
Right. So we had gone to a restaurant, and an older gentleman had stopped by our booth and said, "Hey, I just realized you look like Brad Pitt." And then Jamie got really upset, and he got very emotional, and he didn't want to eat, and he didn't want to talk about it. And I finally drag out of him that he had kind of assumed that he was passing, I guess, even though he hadn't ever used that word or expressed an interest in that. He assumed he looked like a woman, and he felt very insulted to find out that he didn't. And as we explored that incident and his reaction to it, he began to say, yeah, I guess I do want to identify as a woman.
It's interesting because there was obviously, and it seems a bit suddenly, a kind of delusion. That incident, you wrote about that in the book. And, he not only seemed surprised when people in the outside world saw him as a man, not as a woman. But even he seemed surprised to himself. Like he would put on a dress and look in the mirror and be super upset that what he saw in the mirror was not maybe how he saw himself. I'm not sure if that's the most accurate language to use.
Yeah, I think almost, the dysphoria kind of goes both ways, where sometimes it would seem like he really felt good. He would put something on, he would feel really good about it. We'd be walking in the mall, he would be proud of himself and feeling cute, and then he'd catch a glimpse of himself in a mirror, and he would be upset because he didn't look nearly as feminine as he thought he did. And then other times, he kind of thought that he passed and that he looked great, and then when someone would indicate otherwise, he'd feel very, very surprised at that.
Why do you think that was? What happened there where he, because the reality is that most men who identify as trans women don't look like women. They look like men who are, dressed up as or trying to emulate women or wearing women's clothes. And I think, anybody who's sort of engaged in the debate around gender identity and trans activism will have realized how irate a lot of these men become when people call them he or assume that they're male or treat them like male, like a man. What do you think happened there for Jamie? Again, it was such a short period of time where, he's a man, he likes wearing women's clothes sometimes, and then all of a sudden he wants to be seen as literally as female.
Right. I think if I had to guess, Jamie was spending a lot of time online, and some of that I knew about, some of it I didn't. He was spending a lot of time on message boards for cross dressers and transgender people. He was spending a lot of time getting in debates online. And I get the sensation that he was getting a lot of information from transgender message boards that were sort of telling him what to think. So there's a lot of boards where cross dressers or trans people will post their outfits, compliment each other, tell each other they look like women. I think that starts to maybe, when you're taking in a lot of that, it starts to maybe alter your perception of what you think women look like, because you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of affirmation of it. You're hearing that it looks real, that it's that people are succeeding and passing, and then maybe you're surprised when that doesn't translate to the real world. And I think just between that and just other maybe sort of radicalization from that community, he was getting ideas that people use the word echo chamber. He was getting ideas that were being affirmed in a small circle that weren't necessarily tested in the real world. And then when he interacted with the real world, it was a shock because things weren't as he had sort of allowed them to grow in his imagination.
Right. It does sound like a lot of people, when you hear their stories about transitioning, for young people as well, that a lot of it has to do with spending a lot of time in these online communities that are really obsessed with trans politics and the kinds of mantras and ideas that go along with that, and expectations, of course. I wonder how much you think that that porn factored in for
Right.
Jamie in particular.
Yeah. Well, I know that obviously Jamie looked at porn that first day. I know that he had an interest in that. He didn't make it obvious to me that he was looking at a lot of porn. I think it's hard for me to say how much porn he was looking at. He certainly wasn't one of these people. I kind of hear from other women who've been through this that, maybe they catch their husbands just at it all the time, or their computers are covered with it. That was not the case with Jamie, but I think that it's pretty likely that he retained an interest in that.
Mm-hmm. One thing that was interesting that you discussed, I thought, was that it started to seem like he was no longer interested in attracting you or being seen as attractive by you, or even being seen as attractive by women in general.
Mhm.
But that his interest was, you described it, I'm paraphrasing, as sort of like he's more interested in attracting himself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, our sex life started to suffer, and at first it was pretty mysterious to me. I was just kind of like, I don't know what's going wrong. Um, but there were times when it seemed like he was posing, or he was thinking about himself or how he looked, or maybe he was flipping his hair or looking at his own legs. And it was clear that he was engaging in a fantasy about what he looked like during sex, which I thought was pretty odd because I wasn't interested in him looking female. He knew that.
Mhm.
And I couldn't really understand why he was kind of in that world by himself instead of present with me. Um, and then, yeah, things really deteriorated from there. And I often felt really confused about who he was dressing for, why he was dressing. There was a time when he was sort of freaking out because he thought someone was going to see him. And I was like, well, who are you dressing for? Is it for yourself, or is it to be seen? Because if you're going out in public in something, you're going to be seen. And now you're also sort of freaking out that you might be seen. So it was all very confusing to me, just like what the goal was and why he seemed to both need to go out dressed, but also resent it and feel nervous about it and be angry about other people's reactions, as though he were under duress to wear these clothes and couldn't help it.
Yeah, you wrote about that one of the things that was confusing you is that he was acting as though he had no choice but to do this. So he's destroying his relationship, he's destroying his marriage. He seemed really, really unhappy in the process of this transitioning. He seemed, distraught, really emotional, really unstable, and I think probably kind of depressed. Like it seemed like he sort of gave up on life a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, he was depressed. I mean, he was depressed enough to need antidepressants. Yeah, and he also gave up on his hobbies. So, it wasn't just our sex life and our communication life that was suffering, but also just even his hobbies. He no longer wanted to do anything that he had been doing before, either because it might give him dysphoria or it might cause him to have to wear the wrong sort of clothes, or even just because he was so absorbed in online activities and in just sort of proclaiming his transgender status and defending it and discussing it that he really had room for nothing else.
Why do you think that somebody would continue to do something that was making them feel so bad?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know, except that maybe that online community, they tell themselves they're happy. They tell themselves that this is going to make them happy. Then maybe if they're not happy now, they'll be happy after the next step, the next surgery or the next outfit or the next procedure. It's really hard to say because Jamie, while spiraling into a depression and clearly getting worse from an outsider's point of view, was going online and saying that he was happy and becoming his true self and becoming better.
Yeah. It's so strange. It's really baffling. It's obviously very toxic. And it's interesting to watch a community of people or to watch individuals engage in something that's so clearly toxic and continue to tell each other and to tell one another that it's wonderful. How did his friends react?
So his friends were very supportive. They had no issues when he made his announcement. They were prepared to use his pronouns. They had some slips. I think maybe one or two of his friends were kind of like, well, this is odd and hard to get used to, but whatever, we'll do it, to be nice. His family was the same way. He really found no friction whatsoever with any of his real life friends or family.
Did they notice that he seemed depressed or that he seemed to have changed in other ways beyond his appearance?
Yeah, I think as far as the depression, that may have been something that I was seeing more at home than they were able to see. But they certainly noticed that he had changed. In fact, there's one scene in the book in which I talk about his brother calling him and they get in kind of a debate. And his brother says, "We don't recognize you anymore. Nobody in the family recognizes you anymore. You're not the same person." And then Jamie would say, "Well, just because I've changed my clothes doesn't mean I've changed." And he would kind of lean on that as sort of a talking point, to just to refute that. But they were right. He had stopped backpacking and camping and playing music and singing and doing all the things he used to enjoy.
You talked earlier about this sort of change in the bedroom around, you started to feel like he wasn't really present and that he was thinking about how he looked or sort of observing himself as part of the sexual turn on. And I think the objectification factor of transgenderism, particularly for men who want to be women, because these men's ideas about what it means to be a woman does really seem to be rooted in a lot of ways in objectification. I mean, where do you think he got his idea of what it means to be a woman from? What did he think it meant to be a woman, or to say that he wanted to be a woman? Did he really explain that to you?
No, and I don't think he explained that to himself, but I think what was obvious is that he thought that women were sexually passive. That's something he wanted to do and experiment with, and something that he, I think, felt indicated his identity. Certainly he thought women were pretty. He thought women, dressed a certain way. I think it's impossible for a man to imagine what it's like to be a woman. And so they are really left with a male perception of that. And they really don't know what it's like to be the object of the male gaze. They don't know that we are, tired of it, that it's really no picnic. I mean, certainly when you want attention, it's great to be able to get it. But the idea, I think the male idea of women, or certainly Jamie's idea, was that women are pretty and alluring and can get whoever they want and are sexually passive.
Were you guys still having, I was going to say normal sex at this point, but I mean, were you having intercourse at this point? What was happening in your sex life?
So during the cross-dressing, yes. When the transgender identity took hold, it became very difficult to do that because Jamie would just, he would become dysphoric at the idea of being asked to behave like a male. And so for a long period of time there in the middle, we were mostly not having sex at all because we would make out and then something would go wrong. I was also having some trouble maintaining my attraction to Jamie because of the changes that he was making. So he was doing a lot of shaving, and he was using an epilator, and he was shaving his arms, and they were prickly, and he was wearing a lot of makeup, and there was a lot of he was wearing a lot of fast fashions, really cheap clothes, and again with the sort of posing and things like that. And it was like, it wasn't an interesting aesthetic to me, but it also wasn't even genuine, and so what I really wanted was just to be present in the moment, to be intimate. Instead I felt like I was being dragged into a stage show, so I would say sex was happening really sporadically there for a while. And then, I talk about it happened a couple of times when we were drinking, we had intercourse. But then if we weren't drinking, it was a little bit more difficult. So, as far as normal sex, we were having it very rarely. And whatever sex we were having was mostly just failing to be completed. So,
right.
Yeah.
And did you talk to him about how your attraction to him was changing on account of these behaviors and stuff?
Yeah. So so one of the things that Jamie did early on was he had laser surgery to remove his beard. And he announced he was doing that and really rushed it. And, I tried to tell him while that was happening, this is interfering with my attraction to you. Jamie had always had a short beard for the entire 15 years that we'd been together, sometimes a long beard. Um, he, it wasn't a flattering look for him to be without a beard. Um, Not to mention just, as I've mentioned, the makeup and the prickliness and all the things. And so I tried to tell him early on that the laser surgery was not working for me and was going to be bad for us. He resisted that message, didn't want to hear it, wouldn't talk about it. Um, I did also say, our sex life is really going downhill, and you are not doing anything to fix that. You're not doing anything to make up for it. And he would say, well, what am I supposed to do? And I would say, I don't know, you get creative and try to do what I like, what I like, and then he wouldn't do it. And, at one point he said, well, I feel like a pervert pursuing you when you're not into it. And I'm like, well, then we're really in a catch-22, right? Because I'm not going to get into it, if you continue to put on this act, and then you're not willing to do what it takes to kind of woo me and get me there. And this conversation, we went round and round with this conversation many times, and it would just come to a dead end, and he just wouldn't fix the problem.
You were obviously becoming very upset and distraught about the state of your relationship. It's like quite a heartbreaking story because you guys were so in love and happy, and you had a really good relationship for a really long time, which is actually, I think, like pretty rare. Like, I think,
right. I do think so too. Yeah. I felt really like blessed for a really long time. It was like, yeah, we were just really uniquely compatible, and we had, a lot of private jokes and a lot of fun and, playfulness. And then all of a sudden that was gone, and we had to put on this act, and we could not be intimate, even conversationally.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things that he was doing made me really angry, and I felt a bit surprised actually that you didn't kind of like blow up at him or snap at him more, because I feel like the level of narcissism and self-centeredness and the refusal to like participate or help in the relationship. Like, you guys had gotten to a point where you were carrying the whole financial load. You were working, he wasn't working.
Right.
He wasn't contributing at home. He wasn't doing any housework. He wasn't really doing anything. And then on top of that, he was acting like a narcissistic jerk and like throwing fits all the time and crying all the time and like turning everything around to be about him and refusing to really care about any of your feelings or needs. And I mean, I guess I wondered how you managed to not. I think I would have been meaner than you. I think is what I'm getting at. You were pretty nice to him. Like, you were pretty open-minded and kept some things to yourself, right?
Yeah, I kept some things to myself. I mean, certainly we had some fights, and I do describe a couple of them in the book. I think, I was getting a lot of pressure, from his friends, from his counselor, from him. I was getting a lot of messages that I needed to get on board or get out, and that there wasn't going to be a third way. There wasn't going to be any sort of way forward in which there was a compromise, because Jamie needed to be his true authentic self. And, it was either that or nothing, and so I struggled a lot with trying to put my feelings into words, trying to, make my opinions known, and my discontent and my unhappiness without, running afoul of progressive politics, and so, I hope I haven't, underestimated the number of fights and arguments we had in the book. I mean, there's not room to talk about everything. We certainly had some fights, but it's also true that I did spend a huge amount of time biting my tongue, trying to figure out how to say things, in a way that would relay, look, our relationship's in trouble and you need to meet me halfway, and we need the things back that we once had, while at the same time, not somehow saying something that was not acceptable in the world of transgender politics.
Mm-hmm. And you two went to see a counselor together, and
Right.
she seemed not very helpful to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened there?
So Jamie found us a therapist, at one point, because he was so depressed, and because we were having difficulty with our sex life and all that, I said, we need to see someone. I think you need to see someone for depression. I think we also need to see a marriage counselor. And so Jamie took it upon himself to find the counselor because he wanted to find a trans affirming counselor. And so when we went to see her, first of all, as I'm sure you can gather from my description in the book, she was really, really spacey and seemed not intelligent. And so right away it was kind of like, wow, is this person going to be helpful? But then very soon after we sat down and talked to her, she said a couple of really alarming things. One was that she thought it would be fun if Jamie transitioned. She thought it would be fun to help him do that, which I thought was really inappropriate. She'd known us for minutes at that point. And then the other thing she said was, she looked at me and she said, you might want to get your own counselor. And I said, why? And she said, to avoid a conflict of interest. And so, my next thought was, well, what exactly caused you to immediately side with Jamie and see me as the problem, rather than vice versa? Or maybe you're just a professional and we're both your clients and you can help us both.
That's pretty disappointing and frustrating.
It was really frustrating. Yeah.
Because it seems like she wasn't necessarily there to actually help your relationship or to support the two of you, but to sort of politicize things in the ways that she wanted to politicize things, and obviously was inappropriately biased, I think.
Yeah, and I think she also really did think there was something fun about transitioning someone. She seemed to have some sort of like inappropriate interest in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you made another point around femininity that I thought was interesting, because I think that transgenderism at its root is pretty misogynistic, which is ironic because, of course, like, it's treated as this super progressive and even feminist thing, like breaking the gender binary, and getting rid of these like old-fashioned notions of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. But you talked about this idea of the woman being seen as really just an emasculated man, and as femininity as being lesser than femininity, just being an absence of masculinity rather than it being its own thing. Did you come to that revelation through this process in your relationship?
Yeah, maybe so. I think it occurred to me when, Jamie was sort of dressing up, and then we would make out, and I was having some trouble maintaining my attraction to him. And I think maybe there was a thought that, why should that be true if you've dated women before, and you once identified as a lesbian, you like women, why not this one, and it's kind of like, well, an altered man is not a woman, right? The things I like about women aren't their eyeliner, or, the fact that there's, nothing, nothing between their legs if you move your hand that way. It's like, it's what women have, not what they don't have, that's interesting. Right. And femininity is, or womanhood, I guess, it's its own thing. And the idea that Jamie would seem feminine or seem like a woman just because he had removed hair from his face and tucked his penis so that it was no longer, visible or noticeable, or, removed hair from his arms. It was kind of like, just because you've removed things, what you've become is a man with things removed. You haven't become a woman. You haven't added femininity. You haven't, become a woman. Women are not just humanoid shapes, that are missing masculine features,
Yeah.
women are their own thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it wasn't even, this is something I talked with Genevieve Gluck about too, but it wasn't even, he wasn't even talking about identifying as a woman, or maybe he was sometimes, but he was at least also, if not mostly, talking about actually being a girl, which I thought was pretty strange. Like, he at some point, I think, gets upset about not passing or something like that, and
Mhm.
says to you, "Don't I look like a girl?"
Yes, yeah. Well, I think he was doing both, but yeah, he definitely did that. He said, "Don't I look like a girl?" And it's kind of like, no, you know what? We are middle aged. I don't look like a girl either. A girl is a child. And yeah, it's all part of that sexualization you're talking about. It's all part of this idea that women are just small and cute and passive. It is very odd for a person who, at that point, he was 40 years old, to wish to look like a girl.
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from? I mean, we've heard that also, today in media. There's that,
Mm.
I think his name is Dylan Mulvaney,
Mm.
who's talking about
Right,
his journey into girlhood,
right,
not womanhood. Not
right,
that he could have a journey into womanhood either, but it's
right.
weird. It's weird, the desire of adult men to be girls or to look like girls.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, again, they're giving each other those ideas in social media, but I guess at its root it just comes from a desire to be cute, and to be sexy and small, and that's their idea.
Objectified.
Yeah, that's their idea of femininity, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how were people reacting to him out in the world when you would go to the mall or when you would go to a restaurant?
Yeah, so at the time when we were married, I mean, he basically got no trouble at all. I mean, especially during the cross-dressing phase, we went to a mall very regularly. Some people fell over themselves to be nice to him. There was this store where the clerks were just like, they were happy to see him and they'd run and help him and whatever. And I think they thought it was cute and a novelty and, kind of fun. Um, there's a couple of times in which some people looked at him funny. I talk about those times. But they're really few and far between. One was in a sports bar. I mean, for the most part, I don't think that, in middle class liberal city circles, I don't think transgender people are getting a lot of, flack for just dressing in public.
Right. And yet at the same time, he started to claim victimization,
Yeah.
which, we talked a little bit about. He seemed to get really kind of delusional during this whole process, in terms of
Yeah.
what he expected other people would see when they looked at him. But
Right.
also he started to make things up. He actually started to make up stories about being treated badly on account of his so-called transness,
Yes.
which didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, he did. Yeah. He told several stories online that I had just never heard before. And then in a couple of other cases, he took stories where I was present and I saw what happened. And he either really flipped them on their head and told them completely differently than how they had happened, or maybe just took some seed of truth, someone giving him a funny look or something and embellished on that until it was a whole altercation.
Why do you think he did that?
Yeah, I think that's a break with reality, to be honest. And I didn't think it at the time because I just wasn't sure. Like, I think at the time I thought that he was embellishing stories online to just get attention and social capital, and or maybe he had just kind of lost perspective and it was kind of exaggerating. But when I sort of started to, to write these things down as I was writing this book, I saw things that reminded me, of other people I've known who've had delusions of grandeur and delusions of persecution. And I realized that that was what was happening. So I think he just had a break with reality. I think he does remember those events in that way.
Interesting. I mean, he even at some point said he relayed to you that a man said something like, "I love your pretty face," minutes after the man had said something different than that. Do you
Yeah,
think that was like, was he really imagining things?
I do think so. Yeah, I do. I mean, just if you just take the weirdness of that comment, like this was an older gentleman in a restaurant. Jamie imagined that this man had said to him, "I love your pretty face." There would be no reason why like any man would say that to another man in a public setting. This was also an older man and he was with his wife. And so, that alone, tells me that something odd is going on there with Jamie. I mean, this is not just a straightforward lie. If he wanted to lie about something, first of all, he wouldn't lie about something where I was right there and I saw it. I saw how it actually happened. And he would also, I think, not make up such a strange lie. I mean, there's something very odd about believing that that is an event that could take place at all. It was just a very weird story.
Did you think, you talk a lot about how emotional he got, he was crying like daily.
Yes.
He would break down all the time and
Yes.
then suck up all this energy in the relationship, expecting him to comfort you. Do you think that like extreme moodiness and drama was real? Was he really struggling that much, or was it contrived in some way?
It was real. He was really upset. I mean, I think it's really strange that he was that upset. Certainly, the things that were happening to him did not warrant that amount of upset, but it was real. Yeah.
Did you feel like he struggled with any mental health issues prior to all this, or was it really just that sudden?
Yeah. At the time, like if you had asked me during those years when we were together, I would have said no. That was not obvious to me at all. But in retrospect, I thought of a few things and I did write about this. When his mom died, he had a really unusual reaction, a really strong reaction of denial. His mom and some other members of his family had some mental health issues. Some other members of his family reacted also strangely when his mom died. So I think the mental health issues do run in the family. And I think in retrospect, I saw some behavior that I can now recognize as being a little less than mentally healthy. But at the time, I just didn't notice, or it wasn't extreme enough yet.
Hmm. You were super open-minded. You both were open-minded, again, very liberal, non-judgmental, accepting. It was really important for you to be accepting of him in your relationship, but I think out in the world as well. I think those were your politics. I'm curious to know if you think that's that over emphasis on acceptance, inclusivity, non-judgmentalness, not being shaming, all those things that we hear in third wave feminism
Mm-hmm.
and in progressive political circles. I wonder if you think that, like, in retrospect, that's something that kind of was harmful in any way. I don't know, you personally, or in, your relationship, or
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of society.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, that sort of stuff, I mean, certainly I still want to be tolerant and open-minded, and I have no problem with people wearing or dressing, or behaving in ways that are gender nonconforming. But I think that maybe what I do think in retrospect is that there's a level of obsession with these sorts of things that can make a person very inwardly focused and can kind of nurture a sort of narcissism that is not just like off-putting to your partner or to other people, but is actually not good for you, you know? Like I think about the fact that therapists will often say, you know, if you're struggling or depressed, you know, often they'll say, well, why don't you go do some volunteering? You know, and the reason for that is because if you go and you see what other people are going through, you know, and you see that they have it worse than you, and that some people are like genuinely sick or genuinely poor or, you know, struggling with big things, then you forget, you know, about your really petty, you know, obsessions with your own little things. And
Mhm.
this idea that, you know, your pronouns are of paramount importance and how people see you, and whether or not you're passing, and, you know, these, you know, bespoke identities and which one of the 72 applies to you perfectly. You know, these are first world problems, right? These are things that aren't important in the scheme of the world, you know? And so I think in retrospect, yeah, I don't have a problem with all different kinds of people. I don't want to become intolerant. I'm still tolerant, still accepting, but I don't know if that sort of rumination is healthy. I don't think it is.
Mhm. And in the book, you actually used, you know, female pronouns to
Mhm.
describe trans women.
Mhm.
Did you refer to Jamie as she and her?
I did, yeah. Jamie requested that like around the same time or a few months after the incident in which he realized, you know, that he wanted to pass and that he wanted to identify as female. I did use feminine pronouns for Jamie, especially in his presence. Sometimes when I was talking to my mom or something like that, I wouldn't. There were a couple times when it was awkward to do so. Like, he didn't always dress super feminine, especially at first. So sometimes he would just wear, you know, jeans and a t-shirt. I remember one time we were in a bar, he was wearing a t-shirt with a mermaid on it, and I had to go up to the bar, and we were there with a couple other people, so another couple, a male and a female, and I got there a little late or something, and I needed to say I'm on Jamie's tab, right? Um, and he was within earshot, you know, and what I want what I wanted to say was I'm on his tab because he was dressed very androgynously, right? And if I had said her, the bartender would have assumed I meant the only woman at the table, you know. And so it, it was times like those when I thought, okay, so this is the problem with this sort of thing, right? Is that it's all well and good to say, you know, yeah, I want to support you and do what you like and what you want, but not at the cost of clarity and at the ability to just be myself and to tell the truth and to get a transaction done, you know. And so there were times like that when I was like, you know, this pronoun thing is really, it's really interfering with my ability to actually communicate rather than signal my tolerance and my acceptance.
Is there a reason that you made a choice in the book to use she, her pronouns to describe men who identify as trans women?
So the book, obviously, it's called 18 Months, and it's written in present tense. So what I did with the book, rather than go back and impose my current beliefs or feelings or thoughts on the past, what I did was I told each chapter in the voice of the person I was at the time.
Mm.
And so one of the things you probably noticed is that back in my 20s, when I worked at drag shows, it was very common to call drag queens she, you know, and there was no pretense that they were actually women. It was just sort of it was the convention, you know, it was the thing to do. It kind of felt right because they were all dressed up, you know. So that was something I was used to doing, and it didn't feel like a big um, difficult concession at the time when Jamie asked for it. Like I said, it did become confusing and cause issues at times with communication because of this pretense that Jamie is a literal woman and this idea that you can never let your guard down about that. I mean, that certainly wasn't true in the drag bar, right? If you had said, I actually remember one time one drag queen was talking to me about another one and said, well, she thinks I know her, but I don't remember him. And, he just like changed pronouns midstream. So, that kind of thing was common because nobody was bent out of shape about it. So what I tried to do, was write each chapter from where I was at the time. And so if I was calling Jamie she, I used those words in that chapter. And if my feelings evolved, like I was more upset about something later in the process than earlier, I used my present tense voice in each of those chapters to reflect that.
When you finally ended the relationship, how did that go? I mean, was there sort of a mutual ending, or did you have to instigate that?
Yeah, I am the one who instigated that. It didn't really go terribly at first, although I was kind of surprised that Jamie didn't put up a fight. So I talk about how I went away on a camping trip by myself, and I kind of did some writing, and I came to some conclusions that I wasn't going to be able to live the way that we were living without some major changes. And I knew that Jamie wasn't willing to make those changes. So I came home and I had the divorce talk with Jamie. He didn't put up a fight. He packed his bags. He left the house. And for many months, our divorce process was very amicable. We signed papers ourselves. We didn't see lawyers. We maintained a friendship, and even for a few months, we tried to get back together. We kind of tried to talk it out. We went to dinner a few times. And it was a very amicable breakup at the time. But then maybe 6 months later, Jamie just turned on me, unfriended me from all social media platforms, and published a huge tirade saying that I abused him, and just really naming all kinds of really specific lies about me, saying that I called him names that I had literally never uttered and all sorts of things like that. So it went very poorly in the end.
Mm-hmm. And did he, like, how did your mutual friends react when all of this was going down in terms of the things that he was saying about you? I mean, accusing you of abuse on social
Right.
media is pretty low.
Yeah, I lost the vast majority of my friends because they believed him. There were a few who remained friends with me. They were not the ones who were closest to him in the first place, I guess, more fringe friends. There were also some who didn't drop me immediately, but who sort of became chilly. And then, when I tried to talk to them, that went poorly. But I basically lost almost all of our friends.
So that's pretty hard.
Yeah.
I mean, not only do you lose your marriage, your partner, but you lose all your friends and you're being attacked publicly online. How long ago was that? How many years ago?
This was 2015. The divorce was final in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, since then, did you have a sort of transformative experience politically? Like when you started looking back, when did you start to become more critical, I suppose, of transgendering or trans activism? I don't know how you would describe that.
Mm-hmm. I think that I'm, in many ways still the same person politically. The only thing that really bothered me and that kind of became clear to me while I was writing the memoir is that I'm very, very motivated by honesty and truth. And I want to be able to tell the truth. And so one thing that went really wrong between Jamie and I is that, I told Jamie, like, I'm willing to use your pronouns in public. I'm willing to refer to you the way you want to be referred to. Um, but surely that you're not a literal woman and that our relationship is not a lesbian relationship. And Jamie would kind of throw a fit when we had that conversation, and he would get mad, and he would say that he was a literal woman. And um, back to, the delusions, he spoke about having physical anomalies in his brain and whatever that made him a woman. And I think in retrospect that he really believes that. How he got those ideas, I don't know. Again, he's a pretty standard masculine person, so there's not a lot of reason to believe that. So I think, yeah, my evolution after the divorce was pretty much that I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to only associate with people who would accept the truth from me. I'm really good friends with a trans woman right now who does not, say I'm literally a woman. And being able to tell the truth is everything. That's all that matters. I don't care how this person expresses themselves. You know, yeah, and I think obviously from my experience, I witnessed a lot of things that were really unhealthy, and I saw the transition didn't help Jamie. It made him worse. And so I think there's room to be critical of, the idea that transition is the end all, solution for everyone. So I've changed in that way.
Did he fully transition?
He did. Mm-hmm.
He got all the surgeries.
He's got all the surgeries.
Goodness gracious.
Mm-hmm.
And where is he now? Not literally, but I mean, is he engaged in trans activism? What is he up to?
Yeah, he is. He's in a prominent position of transgender activism work. I don't follow him or keep tabs on him because I don't need that kind of drama in my life. But on the occasions when someone will tell me what he's up to, or I'll accidentally catch a glimpse, he's pretty much still very engaged in the activism and in the online proclamations of his happiness and success and all that.
Mm-hmm. And does he know what you're up to? Does he know you've written a book?
I would say so. I don't know that for sure, but I know that he cyber stalked me for at least 3 years. So I don't know why he would have stopped. Yeah.
But I'm assuming he doesn't try to contact you anymore.
No, he does not.
No. I mean, what would you tell a woman who was going through something like this in her relationship? Her partner wants to start cross-dressing. Maybe he becomes interested in transgenderism.
Right. Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I don't really know because, I wasn't able to reason with Jamie. And I don't mean try to talk him out of it. I mean just try to talk to him like he was a normal human being who could acknowledge true statements, like he was identifying as a woman, but he wasn't a literal woman. I know that I've seen people be affirming and have it blow up. I've seen people be upset and rejecting and have it blow up. I'm not really sure that a person who's going down this route can be talked out of it or can be reasoned with. I think what I would tell a woman is, to figure out what your boundaries are and what your priorities and your values are, which is what I did on that camping trip just a couple months before my divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of did some writing and I thought, okay, what is it that I absolutely can't live with and can't live without, and what matters to me and what's not negotiable? And it's not clothing or words or any of that. It's truth. And it's being able to be my true self too, being able to speak honestly and not bite my tongue and say things I don't believe or feel just because there's someone present who's going to have a meltdown if I do that. So yeah, I would say articulate your own values, figure out what you want. And if you can't get that from the relationship, then move on, because I want women to be as happy and healthy and to own their lives as much as men do.
Do you still feel sad about the relationship?
I don't feel sad. I feel it's very bewildering and baffling and strange, and I feel sorry for Jamie. I think just I saw how unhappy he was. Um, Obviously, I have no idea how he feels now, but I can't imagine that the path he's on has been rewarding. Um, so I think it's a shame. I think it's I feel almost more bad that he lost himself, and that he's not who he once was, than anything, because I cared about him too, and I wanted him to have a good life, and I'm not sure that that's where he is. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, again, I really enjoyed reading the book.
Thank
It's
you.
really interesting. It's, I think, very important and very revealing in terms of the truth behind trans activism and what's really going on with these people. And I wonder how people can get and read 18 months.
You can get 18 months on Amazon in paperback or ebook form. And it is now able to be ordered through bookstores. I'm still working on getting distribution there, but it is in the catalogs and can be ordered.
Perfect. Thank you so much for talking with me. Thank you for bringing this book to me in Mexico. I really appreciate it.
That was fun.
It was nice to see you.
It was wonderful to see you.
Yeah. And
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Of course. I enjoyed it. Okay. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.